The first 20, 30 minutes, in my opinion, I was completely engaged. I was thinking this could be like a generational movie. So in this movie, it's got a little bit of a whiplash vibe going on in the start. You have this woman who works with her mother. They design stop motion films, and her mother's kind of like a prodigy in the industry, and everyone's really has high expectations for her because of the fact that she's able to work with her mother, who's so accredited at making these films. Eventually, the mom of the main character goes on to have a stroke, and because of this, the main character starts to unravel a little bit without the guidance of her mom, who's such an expert in the field. And the final film she's trying to work on before her mom does pass away is kind of put in limbo because she can't really think of any ideas of how to get it to move forward. One day, in between writing and trying to figure out what she's doing for her movie, she meets this creepy young girl in her apartment complex who kind of oversees what she's doing and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" Comes in, checks out her project, and she asks the young girl what she thinks of what she's currently making. The main character tells the young girl that she's making this story about a cyclops. It's kind of like a metaphorical take. And the young girl just simply says, like, this is a completely boring movie. I'm not interested in it. We need to throw it all out, start over, and do a more realistic and scary take. And immediately when you're watching this movie, you know something's off with this girl. The ideas she has, like the way she portrays her ideas, completely abnormal. Like no normal human being would say these things. No, nobody who would like had any sanity of mind would listen to the young girl because her ideas are completely out there. And it kind of goes to the whole thing of the main character is so desperate to be liked because of the contrast she had to her mom, of her mom being like this staunch dictator of the way she did film, that she's basically willing to listen to anything that this young girl tells her. So our main character talks to the young girl, and the main character basically asks her, like, what do you think's interesting? What do you think's creepy? And the young girl tells her, you should do like a cliche old school story where there's like a girl in the woods and a guy's chasing after her. So the main character's like, that's not really my thing. I want to do the one I was doing with my mom. I need to finish this project. And she goes, no, what you need to do is you need to have a character trapped in the woods with a man chasing her, and we can do it in steps. It'll be a 3-night process, and every night this character we create called the Ashman will come and he'll progress the story a little bit, and it'll just be like on the first night, on the second night, on the third, and it'll get progressively more tense, and then eventually it will lead to a super buildup of the scary scene, and everyone will find it so terrifying. Now, starting off with the first positive of this movie is I think the main actress does an amazing job. I'm not super familiar with anything else she's ever been in, if she has been in anything mainstream, but I think she kind of kills it in this role. Now, a little bit later in my review, I'm going to get into the particulars a little bit, but the main character is asked to do a lot in this role, where she's expected to portray a normal, happy person, someone losing their mind, someone who's scared. She just has like a lot of depth she needs to reach in this role, and I think she does a good job with it. So much so, in fact, I would actually say that that ends up probably being the single best part of the movie is the acting, is I think everyone involved in the movie did a pretty good job. And a movie like this that kind of does get a little bit cerebral towards the second half, I think it's very important that the actors are believable. Continuing with some of the positives, I think this movie has a very good score, like very good music line to what it's doing. Which is a contrast to a movie I reviewed a little bit ago, the original Prom Night, where I said the music was, completely outdated, takes all the tension out of the movie. I thought this movie has a good score in that it's a lot of modern takes on, tension and suspense. It's a lot of violins. It's a lot of, sharp noises, knocking on the wall to get people to, like, say, what was that noise? Like, it just does a really good job with, like, creating ambience in other areas of the room, either it be, down the hall, in the room over, to which you just hear noises and you think like, okay, my attention is drawn there. At least for me, it made me for the first, 20, 30 minutes of this movie really interested and think like, yo, get back to the story, like get back to that stop motion story she's making, and I want to see how it progresses. Because the way they choose to go about this movie, I think is very, very smart in the first 30 minutes. It kind of starts off where you have her before she meets the girl and when they meet the girl, and they'll talk about what's going to go on with the story, and then they'll like implement it into the film, and you'll see it play in stop motion, and then they'll go like, what's the second night? And then they'll talk about it, and then they'll implement it in stop motion. And it just keeps going to the point where every time they get away from the stop motion, I'm like really interested to see how they're going to finish out her story, because they're kind of developing it in real time with the way they're acting with one another. And I just thought it was super clever. It's something I've never seen in a movie before. Now, piggybacking off that a little bit, I thought the first 30 minutes or so of this movie are very good. Like some of the best movie telling I've seen in a very long time, to the point I was kind of surprised. I was like, why was this on Shudder? A little bit of that more later, how it kind of shows up, I think. But they decided to go a different route. And the first 20, 30 minutes, in my opinion, I was completely engaged. I was thinking this could be like a generational movie. Like I felt like I was watching something like, I've never seen a movie like this. If they go the route I think I'm going to go, I'm going to love this movie. And that's not to say I didn't like the rest of the movie. I just think that the tension in the beginning of the movie is like really not comparable to many other movies. I would say maybe only, the peaks of Sinister, the first, half of Barbarian that, pretty much everyone loves prior to, the change up people have on that movie. And it just has such a unique premise that they're blending the way the real world Tara's going with her constant production of the stop motion picture and the way they're creating characters in the stop motion picture and these creepy elements they're using. I just think it's pretty much unrivaled. Now, I will say, in contrast to the first half, the second half pretty much falls off because the pacing of the second half gets really cerebral and artsy. It's very like Black Swan-y, the way they choose to go about the story and the way they choose to go about like what's real, what she's seeing, is it a dream sequence, things like that, as opposed to just sticking with the meat and potatoes of the horror elements that are really working in the first half. But when you do get to the third act, you're not completely disappointed, at least not in my opinion. It's just not as comparable to the first half. That's not to say it's bad, though. As I said, there are some pretty good practical effects in this movie, and to my knowledge, it looked like everything was done practically, both, the gore sequences and the stop motion picture. And as I said, in the third act, this movie kind of goes like balls to the wall with the body horror they choose to go for. And there's a couple scenes in this movie, one particularly involving the main character's leg, that is very hard to watch. Super cringy scene. It's a complete 180 from the first half of the movie, where it's basically all tension, to the second half of the movie is like all show. And I'm someone who doesn't really have trouble looking at things. I kind of like watch so many horror movies, it's whatever. But that scene, there's a scene in this movie, it's right up there with the Saw. It's a you look away a little bit. Like, I get the gist of what you're trying to see. I don't need to see anymore. And as I said, maybe this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I am going to go into a little bit of like my interpretation of the movie and what I thought, and like, I guess like why I respect the movie more than maybe some people will who don't like it. My little takeaway from this movie is it's very comparable to Black Swan, and they're not really hiding it either. I just think the way they're trying to express the message of like the Black Swan comparison, it's just very cerebral, and it has you questioning what's real back and forth. I took it as a metaphor, obviously, of an artist and how obsession can be a detriment. Basically illustrating the point how reality and your fiction can blur when you become so obsessed with your art. So much so, even to the point where they're having the main villain of the movie, of her stop motion picture, the Ashman, on his 3 different nights. He sees you the first night, touches you the second night, and then basically kills you the third night. And my interpretation of this was basically an inverse relationship that an artist has with their art, where, they can see art touches people, and then maybe their art eventually kills them. They become so obsessed with it. And as much as some of that might be, my take on it, comparable to what other people think, my issue I think I took with the movie, generally speaking, is what I thought they were going to do with the first 30 minutes of the movie, which was to continuously just bounce from reality to the stop motion and kind of progress the stop motion out. And then as the stop motion gets going, we kind of see how that, correlates back to the real life horror they have going on. And if they would have chosen to do this, I think they really had like another Sinister on their hands, where they could have created so much tension in relation to how creepy the stop motion picture was getting. But they really just kind of tail off of the stop motion in general and make it mainly about the main character's, psychosis at the end of the movie. And this is by no means to say I didn't like the movie. I actually really liked the movie for what it was trying to do. It's not like a favorite in the genre for me, but I really respect movies that have creativity and go for it. I've never seen a take on stop motion like this. Never seen it incorporated into a traditional movie where you kind of like see stop motion characters in reality. I'm never seeing them actually just design the stop motion. And if this is anything, honestly, this is the type of movie that makes me respect the director of the movie more than most, because he just goes for it. And I'd rather remember a movie for even being weird and different and get excited about what they could possibly make than to just be bored by a traditional slog of a story like a haunted house thriller or something like that. Because going forward, this director definitely has talent. I think there's definitely a lot of, scenes in the movie where they create genuine tension and scares. And a lot of the set pieces he created were completely unique too. Like the way they build out the stop motion story and the way they create the characters and the creepy girls' ideas for how they're going to create the characters. I just thought it was a pretty fresh take, honestly. But yeah, in the end, this movie has a little bit for everyone. It is pretty artsy over the top by the end of it. So maybe that'll lean more towards that like elevated horror crowd. But as I said, it has some body horror. It has like some good gore. The acting's good. So I think pretty much any horror fan that likes unique stories, that's seen the majority of them, will enjoy this movie. But anyways, guys, that's my take on stop motion. If you guys did see it, I'm very curious what you guys thought. So please leave a comment below. I really want to discuss it with you guys in the comments and see if my interpretations, what you guys got out of it. If you guys have a different take on like the artsiness of what they're trying to show. Do you think it's just a traditional movie? Because my theater was pissed when I left. I went to get up and see this movie, and I overheard people saying it was the worst movie they've ever paid for. There's no story. It was terrible. pointless thriller. And so much so to the fact when I walked out and in, the people at the desk like asked me what it was. They'd never heard of it. I guess nobody's heard of this movie because I just picked it on a whim. So yeah, let me know what you thought. Comment below, like, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.